Your turn. Welcome back to the Storyteller's Moon, where love burns bright and shadows linger close. If you enjoy original romantic and chilling tales, please like this video, tap subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. Tonight's tale is one of dread and inevitability. In this town, everyone receives a letter. Each letter has a date, and on that date, you disappear. This is your turn. Part 1. The letter arrives. The envelope slid under Sam Hart's door so quietly that he didn't notice it until he'd already stepped on it. He peeled it off the sole of his boot, annoyed, expecting a coupon flyer or a church invitation from one of the town's friendlier zealots. The front was blank, except for a tidy block-printed name centered on the paper. Samuel Hart. No return address, no stamp, no smudge where a human thumb might have dragged a print. The paper itself felt expensive and wrong, too smooth, too cool, as if it had just been ironed by someone who wasn't breathing. Sam turned it over, then brought it to the kitchen table, like contraband. It was early, dew still clung to the grass outside, and the Ashgrove water tower had not yet decided what kind of day to reflect. The kettle wheezed toward a boil. He opened the envelope. Inside, a single slip of paper, centered, 4 words, October 18th, 2025. Your turn. He stared until the letters blurred. Then he laughed, a dry bark that didn't feel like his. Okay. Hilarious, he told the empty apartment. Very funny. The kettle clicked off. He poured water over instant coffee because he had not gotten his life together enough to buy a French press again. He tucked the paper back in the envelope, slid the envelope under the sugar jar, and told himself that's where dumb things went to die. On the walk to work, he pretended not to notice how people looked at him. Ashgrove had a way of glancing without being seen glancing, heads tilted just so. Conversation paused at the precise edge of a sentence. Mrs. Nguyen, sweeping her porch, gave him the exact same nod she had given him every morning for a decade. But her eyes softened in a way that made him want to ask what she knew that he didn't. At the diner, Old Man Calloway sat in his permanent spot by the window, fingers wrapped around a cup that hadn't been filled since 1998. Sam slid onto the swivel stool and waited for Marnie to pour him coffee that would taste like a decision he'd regret. Calloway's gaze snagged on him and held. Got yours then, he said, like he was commenting on a haircut. His voice had gravel in it today. Got what? Sam asked. Calloway nodded toward the pocket of Sam's jacket, like he could see straight through fabric. The courtesy. Marnie set the mug down too hard. Coffee sloshed over Sam's fingers. Hush, Mr. Calloway, she said, and the hush was not the normal kind. It carried warning inside it, lined with pleas. Sam wiped his hand on a napkin. What courtesy? Calloway blinked long and slow, a turtle considering the road. Best to put your things in order, he said finally. Tie the knots you can reach. Marnie leaned in. Ignore him, she said, smile too bright. You want eggs today, Sam? He looked at her, and then at the lip of the mug, and then at the door. He'd been in Ashgrove long enough to know when the wind had shifted and the town was moving to some rhythm no one admitted. He left a 5 on the counter for $1's worth of coffee and stepped back onto the street. At home, the envelope was where he'd left it, tucked under sugar, as if sweetness could hold it down. He slid the paper out again, read the date, read the words, read them again until his mouth formed your turn without sound. He tore the slip in half, then quarters, then eighths, then smaller, white confetti drifting into the trash like very polite snow. He went about his day like the letter had never existed. He did laundry. He texted his sister Kira back about Sunday brisket. He pulled the dying leaves off the spider plant on the windowsill and apologized to it for not being a better caretaker. By night, he had almost convinced himself he'd fallen for a prank that would make a certain someone at the hardware store grin. In the morning, the envelope sat in the center of his kitchen table again, uncreased, unopened. Sam didn't shout. He didn't cuss. He simply stood there a long time, and then he laughed in a way that made the room smaller. This time he didn't tear the paper. He folded it once, twice, a third time, slid it into his wallet behind his expired parking pass, and went to work. Ashgrove met him the way Ashgrove meets its own, kindly from a distance. He saw it more clearly now. People made space around him, the way they did around wet paint or a dog that might decide to become problems. Sheriff Lang tipped his hat and didn't let his eyes meet Sam's. Two teenagers on bikes swerved wide and pedaled faster. A woman he recognized from the church quilt guild gave him a casserole in a pan she said he didn't have to return. It was Tuesday, and Tuesday had never been casserole before noonday. By 11, the word courtesy had stopped sounding like a word. At lunch, he dropped into the library to print a shipping label. Mrs. Harper stamped due dates with that precise, authoritative thunk he loved. She greeted him with the same library voice she'd used since high school. "Samuel, how's your mother?" "She's fine," he lied. "Out in Boise, being inevitable." "Good." Her hand hovered over the stamp. "If you need anything." She let the rest dangle. He hated how his heart lurched at the idea that what he might need could be named. "Mrs. Harper," he said, before he could edit himself back into something sleek. "What does it mean when an envelope comes with a date?" Her eyes flicked up, and he saw it there. Recognition sliding over the surface, like oil. She set the stamp down gently, as if stamps could spook. "It means you should talk to your sister," she said softly, "and you should come by and return any books you've been meaning to finish." He swallowed. "I could just keep them," he joked, and he wasn't joking. "You could," she said, "but I wouldn't." On the way out, he bumped into Kira's husband, Marcus, who pulled him into a hug so firm it almost knocked the air out of him. "Hey, man," Marcus said into Sam's shoulder. "Sunday. Don't be late." Kira made lists. Sam nodded into flannel. He wanted to ask if Marcus knew. He wanted to ask if the envelope had already come for him. He wanted to ask 100 things people in Ashgrove never asked each other out loud, because some truths were impolite to force into the daylight. He didn't ask. He went home. He sat in the quiet. He took the folded paper from his wallet and smoothed it on the table, like a sailor studying a map he did not want to follow. October 18th, 2025. Your turn. He checked the date on his phone. 3 weeks. Sam put the coffee on for no reason and watched the kettle discover steam. By the time it clicked, the room had decided to feel colder. That night, he dreamed about a hall with too many doors. He woke with a taste of dust in his mouth, the envelope in the exact center of his chest. He didn't scream. He set the paper back on the table and whispered, "No." to no one in particular, which was the first untrue thing he'd said all day. Part 2. The town's rule. It wasn't a secret, not really. It was the kind of thing everyone knew, and nobody said if they could help it. A rule like the smell of rain or the pull of gravity. In Ashgrove, envelopes arrived. Inside each, a date and your turn. Sometimes months out, sometimes years. And when the date came, so did the vanishing. They didn't call it death. Death had a body to it, a weight you could lift one last time. This didn't. There were no funerals, only potlucks. No graves, only gardens where names were planted, and certain plants never took root. People didn't move away from Ashgrove, because that felt like cheating on a test whose grade would find you anyway. Sam learned quickly that if he asked directly, people took out the same set of words and laid them in front of him, like Tupperware. It's the way things are. Best to make peace. We all get our turn. He stopped asking, but he kept listening. In line at the post office. They got their letter yesterday. No, I won't say who. Hush. Don't be ugly. At the grocery. Put 2 of the cakes aside. You know why at the clinic. No, Doc. I don't need a refill. It's next Friday. At the bar. A toast that ended with more silence than beer. Sheriff Lang parked at the curb outside Sam's place one afternoon. Long enough to look like he'd had a purpose. He rang once, removed his hat in the hallway, and stared at the hygrometer like it was a clock. If you want me to sit in my cruiser out front the night of, I can do that, he said. And there was fatigue in it, and relief, like offering the same useless umbrella 100 times to 100 people who learned the rain wasn't water. Does it help? Sam asked. For me, Lang said. Sometimes for the family. He hesitated. If you want to be, you know, with someone, it's allowed. Allowed, like grief was a porch light you turned on for certain guests. Sam said he'd let him know. That night, he placed the envelope under a heavy book, and then placed the book under another book. He slept on the couch instead of in his bed. At 3 in the morning, he woke to the sound of paper sliding across wood. The envelope sat once more in the center of the table, precise as a priest. He started to carry the thing with him wherever he went. He hated that this felt like obedience. Let me see it, Kira said. They were at her kitchen island, Marcus carving brisket as if he could threaten a bad outcome with a good knife. Their kids kept their voices whisper quiet in the other room, which was worse than loud. Sam handed her the paper. She held it like it had both heat and cold. Sometimes they come early, she said. Kira, he said softly. She looked up at him, and he saw the month her face had lost when she turned 30, and the envelope had arrived with a date for June 12th, 2023. It came for both of us, she said. Same day, same hour. We sat on the floor, held hands, and waited. When midnight rolled in, something in the house breathed in. It wasn't wind. It wasn't the fridge. It was like a mouth everywhere. Sam reached for her hand. And? She blinked, and a single tear tracked down her right cheek, an old habit from childhood falls. I woke up on the floor to sunlight and cold coffee. Your phone had 3 missed calls from me. I thought I had slept through my own vanishing. And? He asked again, because he needed the worst part out loud. Rachel was gone, she said, voice very small. My sister. Same letter, same hour, same room. Just gone. Marcus set the knife down, wiped it very carefully, and came around to fold them both into his chest. We don't know why, he said into Sam's hair. Some stay, some go, some get spared, or delayed, or traded. There are more theories than honest roads. Kira squeezed Sam's fingers. Promise me you won't be alone that night. I don't want you watching, he said. I didn't ask what you wanted, she said. And there was a smile in it that was all teeth and love. He promised, and meant it, and didn't. The town's rule had other, smaller rules, tucked inside it, like nested dolls. People left their doors unlocked the night before a date, because it felt rude to make something knock twice. People cooked too much food and delivered it without ringing. People returned library books with notes tucked in. You can keep this. It was yours anyway. And Mrs. Harper stamped them as if they had never been checked out. There were little black ribbons on some mailbox flags in Ash Grove. If you knew, you knew. At the barber shop, Earl the barber draped a cape around Sam's shoulders and stared at his reflection as if daring it to flinch. You want the truth? He asked, and shaved a neat line around Sam's ear. I'm not sure, Sam said, but keep talking. My letter came when I was 19, Earl said. Date was for when I turned 25. I married the girl I loved because we thought we had 6 years. We had a baby at 22 because we thought we had 3. The date came, and I went to bed like a coward and woke up like a thief. Still here. My wife got hers the following year. He paused. It said yesterday. Sam swallowed. Earl. Earl snapped the cape loose with the drama of a preacher closing a Bible. You don't get to pick the math, he said. You get to pick who you stand next to while it writes itself. Sam tried to pick. He really did. He texted Kira he'd be there. He texted Marcus a thumbs up. He hoped read like courage. He even called his mother in Boise, listened to her talk about the farmer's market and the neighbor's new dog, and the book she had decided to write at 62. I am finally old enough to tell the truth. He did not mention the letter. At the end, she said, leave me a message if I love you, which was a mistake she'd made years ago and never fixed. And Sam laughed too hard and promised to visit in November. He did not tell her November would not have him. The days shuffled like tired cards. October thinned the light and sharpened the air. The maple on Main Street turned sullen red. Children counted down to Halloween with the particular holiness of candy religion. Sam counted down to nothing and pretended it was the same thing. On the 14th, he tried to burn the letter. It didn't catch. The edges browned and curled obediently, but the black ink did not smudge, and when he lifted the page from the flame, it was only whiter. On the 15th, he put it in the freezer. On the 16th, he buried it under a rock by the creek. On the 17th, it was the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes. Someone had slid it under his pillow like a mean tooth fairy. That night, at 11:59, the lights in his apartment flickered once the way a throat clears before the bad news. He'd turned every lock. He'd stacked a chair under the knob. He'd moved the dresser against the door like a joke. He hoped the universe would find charming enough to forgive. At midnight, the lights went out. He heard 3 knocks from inside the wall behind his headboard. He said his own name out loud to check if his mouth still worked. Sam. The sound reeked of breath and fear. Something leaned, just slightly, against the apartment from the outside. The windows did not rattle. The floor did not creak. The air did a small math that left less of it for him. And then, from the dark, next to his ear, as gentle as a parent waking a child on a snow day. Your turn. Part 3. The Countdown. The worst part was not the voice. The worst part was how careful it was with him, how it seemed to know which threads were load-bearing. It did not slam doors or scatter chairs. It did not thunder down the hall. It waited. He held still long enough to decide that a flashlight is a religion you invent when God can't be bothered to hold a candle. He found it in the drawer, switched it on, and nearly cried when it obeyed. The beam carved a pale cone through the room and proved there were only the things he owned in it. He panned across shelves and saw his own careful little life, a chipped mug, 2 diplomas in frames he'd never hung, souvenir snow globe from Boise that had leaked itself to a glittery death, a plant valiantly pretending he'd water it tomorrow. The letter lay on the nightstand where it had never been. The words glowed faintly only because his eyes were doing a bad job. He read them anyway. October 18th, 2025. Your turn. He said, "Not yet." And the apartment did not argue. He slept in scraps and woke in worse ones. When the sun finally did the hard work of arriving, he made coffee strong enough to file paint. He showered with the door open and the radio too loud. He called Kira and let it ring to voicemail, then called again. She picked up, breathless, as if she'd run to get it. "Come here," she said. "Now. Bring a change of clothes and your skittish heart. I don't want the kids to—" "They know," she said. "They live here. They know everything." He went. He let Marcus feed him until his jaw hurt. He lay on their couch and watched a cartoon about chickens arguing with clocks. He answered the kids' questions with the bravest honesty he could assemble. "Yes, I'm scared. No, I don't know why the world is like this. Yes, your Halloween costume is perfect." He fell asleep there, and nobody moved him, and he woke to his niece's hand on his cheek. "You're still here," she said, like she was practicing. He could have stayed. But in the late afternoon, he felt the tug of something he refused to give the dignity of a name. "I should get the apartment ready," he told Kira. "For a guest?" she asked, eyebrow doing its older sister climb. "For whatever happens," he said. "I'll come back after." She kissed his forehead the way she did in middle school when he'd blown a test. "I love you." "I love you," he said, and did not add, "if I love you," even in his head. Back home, he cleaned like penance. He folded the blankets he never folded. He washed the dishes and dried them to squeak. He took the trash out and then took it out again because it felt like progress. He wiped the mirror till it confessed fingerprints he didn't remember making. He stretched fresh sheets so tight the bed looked surprised. When he looked up, the hall had lengthened. He blinked, and it snapped back to size. But the impression of distance remained like a bruise on the air. He walked it anyway, touched the front door to prove he could, checked the windows he'd already checked, and returned to the table where the envelope sat. He did not touch it. At 9 p.m., his phone buzzed. "Sheriff Lang, out front if you want a car in sight. No pressure. Earl the barber. You look good non-dead. Mrs. Harper, if you don't bring that overdue back tomorrow, I will add a late fee to your ghost." Marnie from the diner sent a photo of a slice of pie on a plate with Sam, scrawled in chocolate syrup, like a child had attempted cursive in sugar. He texted back hearts and jokes, and then turned the phone face down. At 10 p.m., the apartment started making new noises. Not big ones, the kind you hear when the building wants you to believe it has bones, a tick in the wall, a sigh under the fridge, a tiny stretching of something unseen. He closed his eyes and mapped the sounds to plumbing and heat and mice that did not exist. He almost succeeded. At 11 p.m., the mirror caught him moving, a second after he'd already moved. He froze and watched himself decide to freeze. He smiled at himself to prove a point and hated the way the smile lingered on the other side, like a secret he hadn't told yet. He backed away, and the other him did not, for a breath, as long as a life, and then it did, catching up with easy grace, like it knew the steps better. At 11:30, the town came closer without coming in. He heard a car pull up, idle, pull away. He heard neighbors pass under his window, speaking the careful hush that is neither prayer nor gossip, but an old agreement to witness without interfering. He heard the far, lonely bark of a dog that had learned to cry on key dates. At 11:47, he unlocked his front door and locked it again, 3 times, to check whether ritual was stronger than fear. At 11:53, he placed the envelope in the center of the table and sat in the chair across from it as if it were a person he owed money to. At 11:59, he whispered, "Kira, I'm sorry," to the room, and it did not text her for him. Midnight came in on a quiet shoe. The light did not go out. It went thin, as if someone had stretched it and it had become see-through. The apartment exhaled differently. The edges of the table sharpened, and the corners of the room rounded, and nothing made sense, in a way that felt both intricate and stupid at once. 3 knocks, from inside the wall behind him. Not loud. Flat, like wood on meat. He didn't say hello. He didn't stand. He didn't reach for the phone. He looked at the envelope and noticed, for the first time, something he had not noticed because his eyes had been swimming. At the very bottom of the page, almost invisible, the faint imprint of a second line. He angled the paper toward the thin light. The imprint resolved like a bruise. Not alone. He felt the shape of the words more than he read them. He thought of Kira's grip, of Earl's cape, of Mrs. Harper's stamp, of Sheriff Lang waiting in a car with coffee that had gone cold 3 times. He thought of Marcus's hand on his shoulder, a weight he knew better than the weight of his own name. The knocks came again. 3 beats. Your turn. In percussion. He stood, very slowly, and took the envelope. He put it in his pocket because he couldn't think where else to put a fact. He walked to the door. He unlatched the chain. He turned the deadbolt. Once, and then again, and then the wrong way, because fear does not know left from right. He opened the door. The hallway outside was empty. The bulb over the stairs buzzed in a key that had not been invented. Sheriff Lang was not on the landing. A cup sat on the top step that might once have had coffee in it. The air was cooler in a way that had nothing to do with weather. "Okay," Sam said to the staircase, which felt safer than saying it to the air. Behind him, deeper in the apartment, something breathed. Not a sound so much as a rearrangement, like the floor had decided which way it wanted to slope, and the walls had talked it into compromise. He did not turn around. He did not have to. He knew where the breath lived. "Not yet," he said again, to nobody and everything. The hallway didn't change its mind. The apartment didn't either. A shadow fell across the threshold, delicate as a curtain pulled just so. It had no source and every source. It was taller than any person he knew, and thinner than could be healthy, and shaped like a mistake that had been sharpened on a whetstone. It extended a hand. The hand had too many knuckles. It stopped just shy of his chest. Sam took one step back. Kira, he said, to practice, and because her name was the first thing that didn't taste like fear. The shadow turned its head, or the idea of its head, and the hall stretched again, and then the apartment folded neatly in half the way a paper does before a cut. He was not in his doorway anymore. He was in the hallway from his dream. It went on and on, a catalog of doors. On each, a name he recognized. Some he didn't. Each door painted a different color. Each knob different. Brass, glass, iron, bone. Some hung wreaths. Some wore scars. Some bloomed with wallpaper that had not existed since long before he was born. The knock came again. Not at his back. Not at the walls. From all the doors at once. The shadow stood beside him. It did not touch him. It had hands enough to spare, and used none. Choose, it said without voice, because the hallway did not need sound to communicate intent. Sam swallowed. His mouth had the taste of metal in it, like he'd been biting a coin. You want mine? He said. Don't you already know it? The hallway had the patience of a courthouse line. Sam walked. The first door he passed had MRS. Harper stamped neatly, as if she'd done it herself. A library stamp lay on the floor as a stop. He kept walking. The second read Earl, and was the exact green of the barber's childhood bicycle. He kept walking. Marnie's door smelled like coffee that had never cooled. He kept walking. Halfway down, he found Rachel in pen, as fine as a hair. He closed his eyes. He pressed his forehead to the door. It was warm. On the other side, nothing moved. He stepped away as if from a grave, and hated that the world had built a place where a door could be a headstone. He found Marcus and Kira side by side. He reached out, but the shadow's knot hand lifted a fraction, and Sam stopped, and some part of him was grateful for rules, even when the rules were invented by things that did not have lungs. At the end of the hallway, a door stood slightly open. Not much. 2 inches, maybe. The exact width Sam always left his closet. The paint was the dull white of landlord decisions. The name on it was short and unavoidable. Samuel Hart. He put his palm against the door and felt, for the first time since the letter came, the steady, ordinary beating of his own heart, like a metronome that had never agreed to graduate to symphony. He pushed. Part 4. Your turn. The room beyond the door did not look like a room. It looked like the place a room goes when it has been emptied of furniture, and then emptied of use, and then emptied of the memory of either. It was not black or white. It was the color you see with your eyes, closed on a sunny day. There was a table, because of course there was. The envelope lay in the center of it. He did not need to open it. He did anyway. October 18th, 2025. Your turn. Beneath it, the imprint he'd seen, in thin light, now pressed deeply enough to be its own sentence. Not alone. He looked up. The shadow had not followed him through. It stood in the hallway by the door, patient, as if it were a doctor, letting a patient discover the diagnosis on his own, because he had learned that was the only way certain truths stayed discovered. Sam pulled the other chair out from the table and sat. He put his hands on the wood and waited for them to leave sweat prints. When they didn't, he wanted to laugh and did not. Okay, he said to the room. We're here. And I am. And the paper is. And I think I get to talk first, since I did not ask for any of this, and I was raised to believe hosts should let guests speak. He smoothed the letter flat because he did not know where else to place his fingers. You take us, he said, or we go, or we are asked to, and we behave. I don't know which verb is the right one, because they all feel too polite. Some people stay past their date. Some leave early. Some leave from the same room while someone else doesn't, which is unkind in a way that makes math look like mercy. He swallowed. You make a hallway out of names, and then ask us to admire your carpentry. The room had no corners for echo to get stuck in. His voice landed and disappeared. He felt a little foolish. He kept going. I won't bargain, he said, surprised to hear the choice in his mouth. I won't offer trades. That's not love. That's a market. I won't ask you to take me tomorrow, or next year or never, because I think that's not the point. I will say this, though he paused. He pressed his thumb into the fold of the envelope and felt the notch he had accidentally made that first morning. I will not go quietly into something that denies I had helpers. If I go with names in my mouth. If I stay with the same ones. Either way, I don't want to be alone. The door at his back moved 2 inches, which felt like a nod. He breathed once, in, out. The air had a taste like spring under a snowbank. Then let's do it, he said. He stood. He tucked the letter into his pocket and left his wallet on the table, like a joke that was not a joke at all. He turned toward the door with his name on it, and the hallway beyond, and the shadow waiting like a canvas, waiting for paint. And then, somewhere soft and human, the sound of a stamp thunking paper. He turned. Mrs. Harper stood in the doorway to the room that was not a room. Hair in the bun he had seen since he was 12. Cardigan the exact gray of every library morning. Behind her, Earl, thumbs hooked in the pockets of a barber's smock that had seen too much good hair. Marnie from the diner with an apron that shouted, "Try the pie." Sheriff Lang with his hat mangled in both hands, like a man who knew he did not need it, but needed it anyway. Marcus, jaw set. Kira in front of them all, eyes glittering with a wet he had loved since before he learned that tears had salt. Not alone, she said, and the room was suddenly large enough to fit the word. Sam laughed, one burst that turned into a sob halfway, because the body does not put a ribbon on things for you. You can't be here, he said, and he did not mean I don't want you here. He meant I don't deserve this much. We can, Lang said gently, and his voice had the rasp of a man who'd let 1,000 engines idle for 100,000 dates. Some people do. It makes a difference to us. Maybe to the math, too. Nobody's measured it. Earl shrugged. You want to shave? I got time, he said, and rubbed the back of his neck as if he could knead away the ache of his wife not walking in behind him. Marnie set a plate on the table. There was, impossibly, pie on it. Eat, she said. Whether you go or stay, nobody leaves my place hungry. Kira came to him and set her palms on either side of his face. Say my name, she said. Kira, he said. Again. Kira. Again. Kira. She nodded. There, she said. Now the room knows. The shadow at the door did not retreat. It did not loom. It did not change in any way that could be measured with a ruler. But Sam felt something settle, like a coin dropped into a jar, finding its place among other coins. He looked down at his hands. They were still his. Okay, he said to the hallway. Okay. He stepped forward with his people at his back, and the envelope in his pocket, and the letter's second line pressed against his thigh, like a benediction. He stopped in the threshold and turned, because he had one more thing to do. He kissed the top of his sister's head. He tapped Earl's shoulder twice, in the barbershop code of good cut. He took a forkful of pie, because ritual is made of decisions. He walked into the hallway that had been waiting for him since paper learned how to hold ink. The doors hummed a little more brightly. The names glowed. The far end of the hall was no longer far. The shadow lifted its knot hand in a gesture that meant this way, in a language he did not know he'd learned. Your turn, the hallway said, and there was less menace in it now, and more inevitability, which is its own flavor of fear. Yeah, Sam said, and smiled, and found he meant it without loving it. He did not vanish. He did not dissolve or fall or become math. He stepped through the open door with his name on it and felt hands on his shoulders, hands that knew where his bones sat, hands that had held him when he fell off his bike, and when he got the call from Boise, and when he signed the lease, and when he didn't. He felt the weight of his own heart, measured against the weight of everyone who had said it with him. He felt the envelope press into his thigh, and the second line imprint into his skin, like ink that had chosen a better page. He closed his eyes. The room breathed in, and then he was standing in his apartment again, in the doorway, the hall light humming the key of home. The envelope lay on the table. The second hand on the wall clock ticked a brave, ordinary measure. Kira sobbed the kind of sob that meant air had made it back into her body. She crushed him against her and swore into his shoulder. You jerk, she said. You absolute jerk. I told you not to do this alone. I didn't, he said, and the truth sat between them like a clean plate. Outside the window, Ashgrove did not erupt into applause. A car drove by. Someone banged a trash can lid into the wrong lid. A dog barked at a thing that might have been a cat or a belief. The world had not changed its clothes. Sheriff Lang put his hat back on like a man who knows how to end a scene. Well, he said. Pie? Marnie nodded. Pie. Earl wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. Haircuts on the house, he said. Not that you need it. Mrs. Harper held up a book. Sam took the envelope from the table and turned it over. The date had smeared at the edges, as if it had been recently watered. Beneath your turn, the second line had deepened. Not alone. He looked at Kira, and then at his people, and then at the doorway to the hall that no longer wasn't there. He tucked the paper into the spine of the book Mrs. Harper handed him, and felt the stamp thunk a due date that did not matter and mattered completely. What now? He asked the room that had tried to make itself a story. Now, Kira said, wiping her face and already bossing grief into chairs. You eat, and you come home with me. And tomorrow, you call Mom and tell her you're visiting this month, not November, because I'm not doing this twice. And after that, Mrs. Harper said mildly, you return your books. And after that, Earl said, You stand with someone else when their envelope comes. And after that? Marnie asked. After that, Sheriff Lang said, we do it all again. Sam breathed in and found the air was his. He breathed out and found it behaved. He glanced at the window, half expecting the hallway to wink at him. It did not. It did not need to. He put his arm around Kira and felt her do the same, the way people do when they have seen a room that isn't a room and learned something untranslatable. Okay, he said one more time. Okay. On the water tower, the day selected a color and stuck with it. In the mailbox out front, an envelope slid under the flag, white and tidy and inevitable, addressed to someone else in Ashgrove. People would look up from their plates at breakfast, from their haircuts, from their library tables, from their lives, and see a name, and know a date, and put a casserole in the oven. They didn't have to get back. They would show up. They would stand at a doorway. They would say names out loud so rooms would learn them. Some would go. Some would stay. Some would find themselves back at their own table with the hall light doing its job and pie on a plate. Sam folded the paper once, twice, 3 times, slid it into his pocket, and felt the second line warm against his thigh, like a promise. Not alone, not alone, not alone. Thank you for listening under the Storyteller's moon. If this tale kept you holding your breath, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves a good scare. Until next time, keep your lights low and your imagination wide open.